Hi guys! New year, new location, and new article, which I'm super excited to talk about today. My beautiful boyfriend is taking a nap, so I'm in my living room today, so super cool. Also, I just want to give a little shout out to my bestie T. This is the hoodie that they made for me a long time ago. They make amazing art and also run a amazing community program called Queer Expression. It's primarily based in St. Pete, Florida, but I believe that they have like a California location as well. And basically they just put on different social events that helps queer individuals, kids who are questioning their gender expression or have family members who are trans, different events like that. They do clothing swaps. Just an amazing person and event organizer. I happen to be wearing their hoodie today. Just really wanted to give a little shout out. I believe that they're only on Instagram. I don't think that they have a TikTok, but that's my boy. Anywho, the article I have today is really good, but I won't lie, it did piss me off at like a bunch of different points while reading it. And it's not the author's fault, it's more so their findings and just kind of the general attitude that current state of sex education is at. So nothing to the authors. So if I seem a bit annoyed at certain parts of this, that's the reason. Let's get into this. The title of the article is The Provision of Relationship and Sex Education Programs for Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder, Staff Perspective, written by Mark J. Brown and G.H. Humphrey in February 6th of 2025, so pretty recent. The abstract states, Relationship and Sex Education, RSE, has been integrated into the national curriculum within UK schools for the past 2 decades. RSC aims to teach about the emotional, social, and physical aspects of growing up, relationships, sex, human sexuality, and sexual health. Such a curriculum tends to be mainstream-oriented, taught in large classes with limited exploration and clarification for those who need it. There is concern that the development of incomplete knowledge and skills places the pupil with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, in a difficult and potentially vulnerable position. The study was the first of 3 looking at development of a more appropriate RSE program for pupils with ASD. The study focused upon evaluating the RSE program being utilized at the time via the face-to-face semi-structured interviews with teaching staff. Participants were either senior leadership members or school RSE coordinators, and they came from 15 schools provided for pupils with ASD in London, Surrey, and Sussex. The resulting qualitative data were analyzed for common themes. The resulting themes highlighted difficulties in implementing RSE programs with pupils with ASD, lack of resources and support, and being able to develop positive RSE. The results indicate that although those in charge of RSE implementation are committed, they are frequently faced with a range of barriers. The discussion section highlights the importance of the subject and the need to increase understanding in relation to such programs. Pretty long abstract, but that is basically what the article talks about. They interviewed a bunch of different members of RSE programs in the UK, and they were able to kind of give their perspective on what's been working, what's not been working, and the struggles that they've been facing. To begin with, within the UK, the national curriculum has included relationships and sex education, known as RSE, for the past 2 decades. The policy regarding RSE places an emphasis upon all school governing boards to provide some form of RSE program. However, schools were left to develop their own specific topic and resources. That's an issue. There is concern that the development of incomplete knowledge and skills places the pupil with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, in a difficult and potentially vulnerable position due to difficulties relating to the lack of social understanding and social boundaries. These can result in perceived defiant behavior, leading to misunderstandings from others. Absolutely. That's why I think I want to place such an important emphasis on sex education, especially for those on the autism spectrum, because unfortunately, a lot of neurotypical individuals, especially those in positions of power, may perceive the unintentional or misinformed advances, statements, or just actions in general of somebody with autism as defiant. I think this is a very important area to not only study but provide knowledge for everyone when it comes to this. The study aimed to explore the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the UK-based RSE programs involving teenagers with autism spectrum disorder within schools, and consider the necessity of adapting the present RSE programs in order to encompass the areas of difficulties that are recognized as being important for people with ASD. The way that they were able to get participants for this study was that to be included, the school had to have a minimum of 25% of students possessing a primary diagnosis of ASD. 15 sites met criteria and wanted to be part of the study. Participants being interviewed in this first study were teaching staff with responsibility for RSE programs, one per school. All were female, and the majority were aged between 40 and 50 years old, with 2 participants being 20 and 30 years old. A little bit of a problem here, because I just think that all genders, all races, everyone should be in all forms of occupation, right? And so there is a low percentage of male social workers, male RBTs, and so I love to just see good male role models where they can be, and so I understand these are the people that they were able to interview for the study, but it is slightly unfortunate that they are all female. And also, I think it's interesting to note on the age, because 40 and 50 is not old, but when you're teaching kids about sex, to them that you're old. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think that's just something to know when it comes to sex ed in general. Measures. 2 processes were utilized: online questionnaires followed by semi-structured interviews. They utilized a range of questions based upon main themes highlighted by previous literature review performed by the researchers. These included different areas of specific questions. So one area was RSE development. What is the school policy relating to sex education? What is the program based upon? How is it developed? Age of students for sex education, things of that nature. The next section would be staffing/training. Who teaches the sex education program? Does the school get outside assistance and advice? The last subsection was program. How is the program coordinated? Who takes responsibility? How is it taught? There's a lot more questions per each of these categories, which I thought they were really good. So some results. When it comes to school details, there's an average number of 132.7 students per school, most of whom were male and predominantly white. The reporting of behaviors centered around 6 behavior types. These were physical aggression towards others, including hitting, biting, kicking, throwing objects at people; verbal aggression towards others, including swearing, insulting others, shouting at others, or spitting at others; self-injurious behavior, including banging one head either with a hand or against an object, biting self, picking skin, cutting self; property damage, including smashing items; refusal to participate, including trying to leave class, sitting on the floor and refusing to get up, attempting to leave the school premise; and lastly, sexually inappropriate or abusive behavior, including issues of age of consent, behavior defined as illegal. Regarding the 2 remaining behaviors, self-injurious behavior and sexually inappropriate or abusive behavior, they were only reported by 2 schools. In both cases, those behaviors were only displayed by up to 20% of the pupils. So not a lot. Concerning, but not a lot. One of the limitations with the data provided regarding behavior may have been the under-recording of such behaviors, potentially due to under-reporting by staff. Additionally, the data reported were based upon the interpretation of the individual completing the survey, which I don't think really makes sense, especially since they operationalized the different subtypes of behaviors that each of the schools predominantly focused on. And so obviously the practitioners who were doing the surveys were keeping that in mind. So I'm kind of confused as to why it was left to their opinion as to how they were going to report the data, when in reality there are operationally defined ways of defining the data in a way. So that was a little odd to me. Interview results. There were 3 overarching themes: the RSE background, resource and support abyss, and attempts to provide positive RSE. Beginning with the RSE background. The conflict between the coordinators and the various infrastructures in and beyond the school, for example, senior leadership team, other teaching staff, and Ofsted, the UK regulator for education services, seemed to be one of the main overarching themes in this section. Such conflicts were not just related to the school infrastructure, but also additional factors such as societal, moral, and cultural views and attitudes. Some education staff did not believe that sexuality and relationships were appropriate topics for pupils with ASD. Obviously, if the staff feel uncomfortable talking about sex, do you think that the students are going to be open to learning about it or even believing what you're being said? And I think it's really shocking that these teachers had the gall to think that, oh, because students have ASD, they shouldn't have access to sex education. What are we talking about? Pissed me off right from the start. The data highlighted several difficulties relating to the consistent implementation of the programs. Participants discussed issues relating to teaching staff's reluctance to teach the necessary subject due to both belief systems and factors more personal to individual staff. Many concerns were linked to lack of skill and knowledge possessed by the wider teaching staff concerning RSC. This resulted in the wider teaching staff feeling unskilled regarding teaching RSC correctly due to lack of effective guidance and training commitment from the senior leadership team. Absolutely, that makes complete sense. If you don't feel competent in what you're teaching, of course it's going to feel a bit uncomfortable teaching it, and so I can understand that perspective, absolutely. But I also don't think it's fair to the students that just because that the people in charge have a lack of skill and knowledge means that they don't have access to the information all of a sudden now. As well as the teaching process, there were difficulties highlighted in relation to staff's views about whether pupils should be taught such a subject. Often such decisions were based upon the perceived needs and ability levels of the individual pupil from the staff perspective. Additionally, there were issues regarding staff's own attitudes about sex education, including whether pupils with autism spectrum disorder should be taught anything about RSC. Are you kidding me? Difficulties associated with religious and cultural beliefs were particularly relevant to schools based in the London areas where there were a more diverse mix of staff, pupils, and parents. Often the clashes regarding cultural and religious views were more prominent within the staff teams in these areas, impacting upon the quality of the RSC teaching, particularly the depth of information provided to the pupils. When it comes to religion and culture, I get it, I completely understand, but it seems that it was more so coming from the staff that was having an issue with their religious and cultural beliefs, and when you're in a position of power, you gotta leave those at the door because you're teaching kids who come from all different cultural backgrounds. And so whatever you have, whatever things that you believe in, those matter, but not when you're sharing pertinent information about the world, especially when it comes to sex. Everyone has sex. So it's really upsetting to me that, again, it seems as if particularly the teachers had an issue. Previous studies have also highlighted the difficulties in staff attempting to not cross cultural boundaries. These issues were more pronounced when the RSC coordinator was not directly involved with the program teaching. This placed pressure upon the RSC coordinator as they would have to arrange for an appropriate person to deliver the sessions. This proved difficult as it could impact upon consistency and appropriateness of information being provided by staff, something previously raised by other studies. Why can't we have general cultural confidence in 2026? I don't understand. And this was written in 2025. Additional issues occur when the topic of RSC would clash with other subjects on the timetable, as staff would highlight how their subjects, for example, math and English, were far more important than RSC. No, I'm not saying math and English aren't important, but far more important? That's absolutely absurd. I think that they're equally important, but wow. In contrast to previous studies, interviewees highlighted how they felt parental attitude was more positive than staff attitude. This included parents wanting to be actively involved with the teaching. Also, most participants reported that they could not recall any pupil being withdrawn altogether from participating in RSC by his or her parents. On the occasions that such withdrawal occurred, the families had felt that it was their responsibility to provide the information to the children. This meant it was difficult for the RSC coordinator to ascertain the accuracy of what was being taught within the home environment. On a small number of occasions when pupils had been withdrawn from parts of the program, this was for cultural and religious reasons. I completely understand the point of this, and I could see how this could be an issue for the coordinator because it is difficult to ascertain what is being taught at home. But I think that maybe we could get around this if potentially the coordinator prepared some type of syllabus as to what type of topics were going to be discussed in that program that semester, that year, and then maybe the parents would be able to opt out or would have some type of take-home packet or thing that they would be able to excuse their child from for those specific topics. But I do see how this could put some stress on the RSC coordinator, and But I do think that it's an important thing to consider when it comes to sex education, because religious and cultural respect needs to be at the forefront of this. Being frustrated was often seen as being a natural part of the RSC coordinator role, regardless that implementation of RSC programs within the schools was part of government legislation. I hate how they feel frustrated. I hate that it's a common theme. It's so unfair. The second overarching theme of the study was the resources and support abyss. Regarding the implementation of RSC programs, participants highlighted how the biological aspects of RSC were easier concepts to teach, as identified by previous studies. The black and white nature of this part of the RSC topic was either incorporated into the school biology lesson or covered in both biology and RSC. All I have to say to that section is that I could bet the mortgage that Turner syndrome wasn't being discussed in biology class. I could bet the mortgage that intersex wasn't being discussed, or androgen insensitivity syndrome. Was that going to be discussed in biology class? Because I don't think that falls within the black and white nature of these topics. So no, they're not being covered in biology. A limited number of interviewees, 4, highlighted how the participants had researched some of the RSE programs for individuals with intellectual disabilities that had previously been developed and published. They subsequently attempted to utilize such programs within their own schools. This often proved difficult to effectively implement due to the wide range of abilities and needs of the pupils involved. It's so nice to see that there are some teachers that were going above and beyond to try to find out how they can get this sex education information to those who have intellectual disabilities, but 4 admitted to doing outside research. Like, that to me is minuscule. Where further elaboration in the material occurred, this only centered upon safety and legal issues. Many participants felt that there was need to utilize an approach that explored the socio-sexual aspects and how it related to individuals' rights and needs. This is a consistent issue raised by previous studies where a lack of emotional and relationship perspective has been missed within programs. Although aspects such as relationships were often taught separately, such an approach led to pupils having difficulties in making connections between the different lessons and teaching methods. Obviously, safety and legal aspects to sex are paramount. They need to be taught. That's so important. But they're not also integrated into the social aspects of sex, the dating, the relationships, the just being friends with people, all those different types of flirting, those types of things. It could seem as if it's just a what not to do list, and it could be fear mongering if you negate adding those social aspects to this conversation and only focusing on the safety and legal. One particular school discussed how they adapted the RSC program to accommodate students with some social skills, but who were still struggling to keep themselves safe. Often these pupils spent considerable time with neurotypical people outside of school environment. This has placed them in difficult positions due to a lack of understanding of some of the coercive techniques being used by others. Exactly. Neurotypical people, neurodivergent people, we all live in the world together. And so obviously if there's certain individuals that don't have access to this information and then they're put in situations where that information is part of safety is important, it's really concerning and it's unfair to me. I think it's just unfair in general. The impact of having to provide differing levels of teaching was reported as being problematic due to the time needed to adapt materials, especially given the distinct lack of autism-specific RSC programs. However, the process of developing and obtaining appropriate materials for pupils with autism spectrum disorder often took up a huge portion of the coordinator's time, which proved difficult when the interviewee also had ongoing teaching commitments. So when I read that, immediately I had 2 different feelings. On one hand, this is your job. If you're teaching this, you should make sure that your curriculum can be suited for them to be able to integrate that knowledge themselves, right? So that's part of the job, right? But again, on the other hand, burnout, low pay, time constraints. I completely understand as to how all these different things play a part as to why sex ed programs, especially when it comes to those on the autism spectrum, are lacking. I'm not trying to place blame or fault on anyone, but both of those things need to be considered because yes, it is part of your responsibility and part of your job description to make sure that you have materials suited for those with autism, but also they need higher pay, they need more time. It's an injustice on both parts. Even when schools utilize known programs for students with intellectual disabilities, such as the Equals program, the additional needs for those with autism spectrum disorder proved difficult. The area of greatest concern for individuals with autism spectrum disorder related primarily to the socio-sexual aspects of sex and sexuality, such as establishing and maintaining relationships, rules surrounding the use of social media, issues relating to coercion and consent. Those proved problematic to teach due to the varying boundaries and unclear parameters that occur within individual social interaction. It truly is hard to objectify the subjective nature of relationships. Occasionally, further adaptation and work was necessary when there was a recognition that some individuals with ASD required additional one-to-one intervention. This approach was implemented when an individual pupil had displayed additional difficulties or when group work proved difficult. Dependent upon the severity or complexity, some participants reported that such work included the involvement of appropriate outside agencies, especially when legal boundaries were involved. Absolutely, I think you should adapt the crap out of education. Like, everyone should have access to this, including sex education. And so I love the fact that, okay, this individual has difficulty doing group work, has generally additional difficulties. We're going to do the intervention on a one-to-one basis because adaptation allows for access, and access is paramount to knowledge. So I love that aspect. In attempting to deal with such difficulties and so more effectively support students, participants discussed the necessity to frequently repeat and revisit topics. This ensured that students with ASD were given the opportunities to further explore and clarify the information provided. Absolutely, repetition's amazing. You should repeat things, you should go over things over and over again because that's how things stick, and I love that. Exactly. The ability and need to access appropriate support from external agencies proved to be an important element of providing a comprehensive program. This was particularly relevant as new situations and topics arose, including legal issues and topics such as female genital mutilation. These were areas the coordinators had to include, but they were not confident about their own knowledge. Such situations would lead to the need to access either relevant sources of information or arrange for external agencies to take the lead in such work. I love this because I think, in contrast to the general cultural competency that I feel as if many of these interviewees seem to lack while doing these surveys, female genital mutilation and just progressing legal issues are very niche topics. And so I love that these individuals talked about how in these circumstances they relied on external agencies to provide that information to their students, because if they don't know it, they better go find someone that does, and I love that. To ensure that programs being used kept up with the ever-changing modern world, the need to evaluate the approaches used in implementing such programs is imperative. However, a number of participants highlighted a lack of such processes within their school due to a range of difficulties. The people who are in charge of these RSE programs are wanting to evaluate to see whether or not the things that they're teaching is still relevant, but they don't even have the resources to do so, and so it's probably extremely stressful for them. Reflexive practices were highlighted by participants as being the only form of evaluation being utilized by the schools, and these were dependent upon observations made by staff. These observations were based upon changes in pupil behavior formed on an ad hoc basis and open to an individual staff member's perspective and interpretation. One of the interviewees was quoted with saying, "We don't have any official framework of evaluation. We just, I guess, it's just kind of ongoing and talking to the students and addressing situations and looking at their behavior and seeing how their behavior changes." That literally breaks my heart because you could see that these teachers care. They want to check in on these students. They want to see if the information that they're talking about is integrating into them. But they don't have the resources to actually check, to evaluate. There's no data. There's no way of there's no assessment. And so they're basically vibe checking the students to see if, hey, is this sticking? Hey, are you feeling good about this info? And that's so unfair to both the teachers in charge and the students. So, And the third and last overarching theme was developing positive RSE. Regardless of the difficulties and barriers faced by the participants, at the heart of it, it was their wish to provide RSE programs to their pupils. Staff competence. The role of program coordinator was often taken by an individual who had an interest in the topic. To take on the role, the coordinator needed to be able to cope with the various difficulties faced by others, including being confident and competent in delivering such programs. Negotiator and peacemaker were roles that coordinators often had to step into regarding program implementation and the tensions present within the wider school structure. This is like if I ran a sex ed program. Like, I don't know anything. I'm doing my best. Yes, I have a social work master's, but what does that mean for the specific education that these students are deserving of having? Like, I think it's just bonkers that somebody who's comfortable talking about sex is the one that gets to be in charge of this program. Who's to say they have the information? Who's to say they have the knowledge? Crazy. Good practice. In spite of the pressures, conflicts, and difficulties faced by participants, they continued to do their best to provide and develop a program. Thank God! Overall, the enthusiasm displayed by participants to develop a program that effectively met people's needs was high. The rewards for participants were to provide an RSC program based upon a comprehensive framework which provided for everyone's socio-sexual health needs. By achieving this, participants aimed to increase the knowledge and safety of pupils so that pupils could potentially experience effective and appropriate relationships. That's super lovely. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. That's what they're trying to do. I think that was pretty evident throughout this article. Limitations. There were a number of limitations that could have impacted upon the results and subsequent interpretation. Firstly, the recruitment of adequate number of schools that met the inclusion criteria and wished to participate proved difficult. Yeah, I think that they were able to get around 150 schools, but only 15 met all the criteria. So that's so small. Second, the recruitment of participants and their characteristics could have impacted upon the results of the interviews. Due to the limited number of respondents and their location, factors such as ethnicity and religion were not necessarily balanced. Reflected upon the mix of teaching participants that were interviewed, the majority would have been classed as white, middle-aged women. We know the issue with that. That's not everyone, right? So that is a huge limitation. In relation to the schools included, the pupil skill and attainment level were based toward more abled students. This could impact upon the ability to compare and generalize the various sex education programs used. This is particularly true regarding those schools providing for students who also have some pupils with more severe intellectual disabilities, requiring a very different program. Very important to consider because of the very limited number of schools that were in this study, most of them had probably either high masking or low support needed students. And so again, that just equates to a very small percentage of the autism community. And so who's to say that the things that were reported upon can be generalized to the entire community? And so yeah, that was the entire article. I thought it was really good. It just really highlighted the need for sex education for everyone, especially for those on the spectrum. And there are people who are trying their best to do so, but they have such limited resources. They have no time to do so. They don't know what they're talking about because they haven't been taught to know what to talk about. And they're scared to because they're not sure where the boundaries are. And with how things are always changing, they need to have different assessments. They need to have different protocols, checklists in place to make sure that what they're teaching the students makes sense and is safe, is pertinent, is helpful. I really did enjoy reading this article. I can't wait to find another one. And yeah, thanks for watching.